So we asked a lot of people, a lot of our committee people, a lot of other people around town, a lot of people in the oil and energy industry that, what would they like to see at our summit this year? And these guys kept getting named every time. I mean, it came up. It's like every other one was said, Digital Wildcatters, the Digital Wildcatters. And I didn't know who they were at first until I listened to their podcast, and I could tell why they're so popular. And it seems like they made a huge showing there at Namoga at their meeting here a while back, and everybody bragging on you guys. So it's pretty exciting. So Colin McClellan and Jake Corley are best known for their extremely popular podcasts, and the focus of their message has often been on ways to communicate the oil and gas industry message to younger audiences. Colin McClellan started his career in energy by roughnecking on oil rigs in West Texas. Over the next 10 years, he worked on every major oil field in the United States, managing drilling projects from the North Slope of Alaska to the deep waters in the Gulf of Mexico. Today, he's the co-founder and CEO of Digital Wildcatters. And after serving the United States Marine Corps, Jake Corley dove headfirst into the oil and gas tech scene, and in 2013, co-founding some of the first cloud-based tech startups, and later co-hosting the first podcast in oil and gas. Now, Jake is also the co-founder of Digital Wildcats and spends most of his time at the intersection of oil, gas, and tech. So please welcome the Digital Wildcatters.
Thank you, sir. That was a hell of an intro. I appreciate you. So I love talking at dinners because you have no option but to listen to us no matter how bad we are. So appreciate you guys sticking through this. I want to give a big thanks to Mayor Janway and the city of Carlsbad for the hospitality today. We had an amazing time on the boat rides and just got to meet a lot of great people today. So my name's Colin McClellan. I'm co-founder and CEO of Digital Wildcatters. This is my partner, Jake Corley. And excited to be here today and talking about the future of energy in the Permian Basin. So I'm from Midland, Texas, grew up here, and grew up in the oil field, roughnecking on drilling rigs. And so I've worked all over West Texas, worked all over New Mexico. So excited to be here. And I'm going to give the mic to Jake real quick. And Jake, tell them what Digital Wildcatters is and what we do.
So we are a community-centric media company. So looking at your faces, nobody knows what that means. So we have a lot of podcasts. We have podcasts. We have a lot of different events that we do. We also do a lot of video content, from just basic YouTube stuff that we started off with up to documentaries that we've done that some of you may have seen. Our whole mission is to change the way the world thinks about energy, raise energy IQ, and bring together the energy industry. And so we actually started, just me and this guy, in a supply closet with a podcast, talking about oil and gas startups. And so at the time, we were, Colin was doing a lot of networking in Silicon Valley and in New York and telling about all the amazing things that was happening in oil and gas about 5-6 years ago, particularly on the technology side, the intersection of oil and gas and technology. That's where I've spent my whole career, particularly building software for oil and gas companies up until the time that we met. And these VCs would come back and say, where do we go to learn about it? You're saying all these amazing things. And there was no place for us to send them. And so we figured, hey, we've got a lot of friends. We do a lot of these conversations over lunch. Why don't we just put a microphone in the room? And so that was the genesis of Digital Wildcatters, was the Oil and Gas Startups podcast, which we still host today, 5 years later. And so from there, it's grown. It was never supposed to be a job. It was never supposed to be this. It was supposed to be a hobby, and we've had a lot of fun doing it. But fast forward to today, we've got a great team, and we continue to do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, so to add on to what Jake said, we started in oil and gas. We come from oil and gas. We come from the industry and have friends all over the United States, all over the world that are part of this. And I think we can all agree over the last couple of years, the energy industry makeup is starting to change. Everyone likes to talk about energy transition this, energy transition that. And I always argue that there's not really much of an energy transition, it's more of an energy addition. You know, energy demand continues to go up. The world needs much more oil and gas, coal, but we also need renewables. We need wind, solar, geothermal, hydro. We need all energy. So very pro-American energy up here, and really want to break down the silos in the energy industry to where, you know, renewables and battery storage and utilities can leverage the expertise that we have in the oil industry. You know, love what you guys did, recognizing people in the field at the wellhead. You know, I was one of those guys. I was oil field services. You never get appreciated. A lot of people don't understand the technical capability of people in this industry. And so for us, that's really what our mission is. One, as Jake said, to educate the world, raise energy IQ among society. You know, you go up to New York City, people think that electricity just comes out of the wall. They don't know how anything works. I mean, this is the most important industry and affects literally every person that lives in a modern society like the United States. And then giving a community and platform for energy professionals to be able to tell their stories and have the resources to go solve the world's energy problems. So what we wanted to talk about today was the future of energy, and specifically in the Permian Basin. You know, I've had a great conversation over the last hour over at this table talking about renewables and hydrogen and nuclear. And what I think is really cool about the Permian Basin is that if you talk to anyone that's not from here, they don't understand just how dynamic the resource base is. Yes, it's oil and gas, but also we have some of the biggest wind turbine farms in the world right here in the Permian Basin. We have a ton of solar, and you know, we can go into things like hydrogen and lithium production as well. And so when I look at the future of the Permian Basin, there's a couple of things that are really interesting to me. One, there's this entire thesis that manufacturing is coming back to the United States. And the thesis here is that, one, COVID showed us that we can't rely on supply chains from places like China, nor should we. And so bringing manufacturing back to the United States, but more so, these are going to co-locate with energy assets. And so if you look at what the Permian Basin has, you have a ton of energy, and you have a ton of technical people in the workforce that can work in manufacturing. And so you're actually going to see manufacturing hubs start co-locating with these energy assets. You look at hydrogen, you know, there's some cool, Jake and I are pretty blessed because we get to talk to some of the smartest people in the industry that are working on some of these technologies. Like, tell them about Moji and Cemvita.
Yeah, so Cemvita Factory is so interesting. These two individuals are, I want to say they're like microbiologists or something. And Moji comes from, I worked for Weatherford for years, and they figured out some way to inject, I don't know, is it a microbe or is it an enzyme or is it a...
Yeah, it's a microbe.
Okay, it's a microbe. So they inject these into existing wellbores, right? So let's just say that we recover on average 6% of a reservoir. They're actually able to use oil as feedstock that these microbes are actually able to feed on, and it creates what they call gold hydrogen, right? So, and they actually just did a pilot and it worked, and now they're spinning off that technology and then IP and actually raising a ton of money on that idea alone. So that's game-changing, right? So now E&Ps can go from being an oil and gas company to an oil and gas and hydrogen company using your existing wellbores. That's mind-blowing. And then you got like Redshift, which is also pretty cool.
Yeah, Redshift is using an electrolysis process, and this is pretty cool. So, I'm going to nerd out here for a second, but they have this plasma membrane that they use, and they run H2S molecules across this plasma membrane, and they can actually disassociate the H2S molecules and strip out the hydrogen from H2S. And so when you look at the hydrogen industry, it's pretty interesting because I don't know if a lot of people keep up with federal spending, but the Inflation Reduction Act, which I don't know why it's called the Inflation Reduction Act, but it had some pretty heavy implications on the energy industry. And one of those is that they have a subsidy that pays $3 per kilogram of hydrogen. And there's a lot of companies out there that claim that they can produce hydrogen under $1 per kilogram. So oil and gas companies that start looking at, okay, we have some, marginal wells out in New Mexico that, maybe it has a little bit of gas content, it's got some methane. Now you can run some Cemvita Factory and you can actually produce hydrogen and capitalize on something that you might not have been able to do earlier. Another place that's really exciting to me, Does anyone know about Bitcoin or Bitcoin mining? Can see a show of hands? Yes.
Oh, that's more than I thought.
It's my people. It's my people. So Bitcoin mining, we did a big event back in March called Empower in Houston, and the whole thesis was bringing together Bitcoin miners with energy producers, because these Bitcoin miners, what a Bitcoin miner is, it's a computer, and it sits there and it does these complex mathematical equations until it gets rewarded Bitcoin, and that's called Bitcoin mining.
Wait, why should they care?
I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Here's why you should care. If I told you that you can make $25 to $30 an MCF compared to spot price of, typically low price environment, $3, but let's just say that we're at $8 an MCF, that starts getting people's ears perked up a little bit. So let me explain this to you guys. Bitcoin miners are searching all around the world for cheap and reliable energy. Who's good at finding cheap and reliable energy? Well, the oil and gas industry is. And so they started coming over to Texas and Oklahoma, Wyoming, and New Mexico looking for stranded gas. And at the same time, you had a lot of oil and gas professionals, engineers that were leaving their companies to start Bitcoin mining companies because they saw the opportunity here where, one, you could either take trapped natural gas that you're typically flaring, and you could use that, run it through a generator, generate electricity, and mine Bitcoin, so you could actually produce an economic return from an asset that is usually just wasted and burned off. The second is I have friends that were pulling natural gas just straight off of a pipeline and mining with it because they were buying it for $5 an MCF back in the day and getting $30 an MCF. So there was a big arbitrage there. So when we look at the future of an EMP, there's so many different ways that, I think that EMPs 10 years from now look completely different than they do today. And I think, honestly, today they look completely different than they did 10 years ago. So,
Absolutely.
like Presidio up in DFW is a perfect example of just forward-thinking EMP that's looking at, hey, how can we be much more than an oil and gas company?
What was the other one we're going to go? Geothermal.
Yes.
Geothermal's huge. You've got companies like Neighbors investing in companies like Quaise, who's drilling with lasers. You and I talked about that forever ago. Didn't know it was actually going to become a reality. That's really interesting. Who's the other one? Fervo.
Yeah. What's interesting about geothermals, two of the leading geothermal companies out there, Fervo Energy and Criterion, both of those are founded and ran by oil and gas professionals. So Fervo Energy, Tim Latimer is the CEO. He was a completions engineer at BHP prior to that, and taken all of his learnings in oil and gas and applied it to geothermal assets. So turns out, the oil and gas industry is pretty damn good at drilling wells. So it's directly applicable to the geothermal industry. So I think when you look at the future of oil and gas, I like to, it was mentioned, I think we talked at Namoga last year, and what I told the room was, when you talk about electric vehicles, a lot of people roll their eyes, right? And for me, I think electric vehicles are, one, I think that they're a better product, but it doesn't matter to energy companies because at the end of the day, you have to produce energy, right? And how are those electric vehicles powered? Right now, 65% of it comes from fossil fuels, right? And so oil and gas companies shouldn't look at it as territorial, like renewables are infringing on us. Look, renewables will never replace 100% of base load for fossil fuels. So I think really changing the attitude that we have towards energy production is extremely important, and oil and gas companies specifically should be looking at, hey, how do we actually leverage our existing assets to do things like hydrogen, potentially lithium production from brine water, Bitcoin mining, and extract more value out of their assets while also thinking about what's the future of energy too, whether it's renewables or geothermal, whatever it may be.
Yeah, just having played in this space for so long, particularly with the podcast, and just having, entrepreneurs that come from the industry who are building really innovative stuff in the office every single day, and having also worked kind of firsthand in the space for the last decade, there's never been a more fun and interesting time to be in energy, particularly oil and gas. My entire career up until now was in a downturn. Now it's not. Things are looking pretty good. We're seeing a ton of people that are leaving their jobs that are recognizing that they have some problems or some solutions to some problems that they've identified throughout their careers. And so we get to see a lot of cool stuff. We can go into it all. But I think what we like to do is usually take questions.
Yeah.
Take some questions?
Also, yeah, if anyone has questions, please ask us questions. We need content to talk about, so
Please ask a question.
help us out here.
Stick a hand up.
Yeah, the production of lithium. So this is really interesting to me. So there's companies like Lilac Solutions that, if you look at traditional lithium mining, you have these huge pools and they take up a pretty big geographical footprint, and it's not the cleanest process, and it's also not the most efficient process. So there's a company like Lilac Solutions who've developed a technology where you can extract lithium out of brine water. And so if you look, who has a lot of brine water? Oil and gas assets do. Now, it depends on which basin and play that you're in. There's higher concentrations in certain fields. But I know people that are oil and gas operators that are going out and buying assets intentionally for high concentrations of lithium. And so, lithium, if you look at renewables and electric vehicles, the amount of metal and materials that we have to make those commercially viable, it's already a stretch to produce enough batteries for electric vehicles. Now we need commercial battery storage for renewables if we want to mitigate the problem of intermittent energy. And so where do we get those minerals from, or those metals from? And we have to find new efficient ways. And so I think lithium is a very interesting space, and it's being driven by technological innovations like Lilac that can strip it from brine water. Any other questions? No. Molly. Yes, this is always the challenge, right? You want out of the echo chamber, and there's a lot of people in here. You may disagree with some things, but overall we agree on most things. And one thing for us is, it's like, how do you get to, think about how do you get to a Gen Zer up in New York City? Like, that's who I always think of, or Boston. These kids are not thinking about energy. And so I'm gonna go ahead and plug my TikTok here real quick. So I started putting out TikTok content a couple months ago. How many people in here know what a drill bit is? Yes, probably 95% of the room knows what a drill bit is. Well, guess what? 99.9% of the world doesn't know what a drill bit is. So I made a video, what is a drill bit? It did 1.1 million views in the first week. And this is like things that are like very common sense to us. Like, you wouldn't ever think like, I'm gonna make a video on what a drill bit is. I've made videos on what's a roughneck. I've made videos on electric frac fleets. And all those videos get, 250,000, 500,000 views. And they're from people asking legitimate questions, and they're curious. And, I think it's easy to hate on people's energy ignorance. Especially when you're in oil and gas, it seems like the world's turned against us, right? And that they hate people in this industry. And it's easy to have disdain for them, but you got to put yourself in their shoes. If you were that kid growing up in New York, why would you know anything about the energy industry? You've never had a medium to learn about it. You've never had a reason to learn about it. You've always had access. You put your plug in the wall and electricity comes out. That's all you know, and that's all you care about. And the new, Gen Z that's coming up, look, we can trash Gen Z all night, but this generation is hungry for knowledge. And they're on TikTok. When I first started getting on TikTok, people were like, oh, are you gonna be on there like doing dances on drilling rigs? Like, what kind of content are you gonna be putting on there?
At least not yet.
Yeah, I don't think I would get any followers if it's me dancing. But this generation's hungry for knowledge, and they use platforms like TikTok to discover new things. And so you put out a 1-minute video of oilfield operations, they find it interesting because that's something that they haven't been exposed to. And so for us,
people probably think it's ridiculous. I know there's probably some gray hairs in here like TikTok, that's a little ridiculous. But let's zoom out from attracting the right kind of talent. That's one of the biggest issues that almost all of our companies face today, is that they grew up thinking oil and gas is bad, right? I think for so long that we look to the big super majors and the APIs to go out there and create this content, and it came across as propaganda, and it made our industry look very disingenuous. Well, that's all changing. It's all decentralized, and it's up to all of us. Yeah. So we hope that these kids in New York and in Boston are on these social media platforms, and they Google or they look up oil and gas, right? And they're probably looking for something bad. And what they find is it's an industry of people who are super hardworking. It's the smartest people in the world who are solving the world's biggest challenges. And so we hope that with all the work that we've done, that we can bring a little bit of a different flavor to attract the right kinds of people that we need for this industry to continue to grow and to continue to thrive and to continue to solve the world's energy problems.
Yeah, like what I would always encourage people to do is, like all these guys that are out in the field, what you do day in and day out is super interesting. And it may not be interesting to you because you do it day in and day out. But there's this roughneck on TikTok. He's a roughneck out on a Kelly rig, and he's got 1.5 million followers on TikTok. There's casing hands, 250,000 followers. Pipeliner TikTok, massive thing. There's a ton of pipeliners on TikTok, and people are extremely interested. And it's not white collar people making that out in a Houston office. It's people that are out there at the wellhead, on the pipelines, out in the field that have the opportunity to do that. And sometimes we get kind of stuck in our own bubbles where we think that the stuff that we do is not interesting, but this industry is very interesting and people are hungry to learn about it. Great question, Molly. Thank you for setting that one up. We have any more questions? I've never been called.
That's a good compliment.
You said the question was, is it true that you're called the dude perfect of the oil field? I have never been referenced to that. That's a great analogy. I don't have very good trick shots, so. But maybe you know what? You just gave me an idea. We should get dude perfect out on a drilling rig from some trick shots. So if anyone has a rig that we can get him out on, let me know. We'll make it happen. Any others? I know someone has some questions. Someone wants to bash on me for being on TikTok.
Small nuclear, yeah.
Yeah, so we just actually had a great conversation about nuclear over here because nuclear is such a polarizing topic. And I always kind of take like a litmus test off of the community on Twitter. So you have oil and gas Twitter, you have renewables Twitter, and you have nuclear Twitter. And renewables Twitter hates both oil and gas and nuclear, so they just don't get along with anyone on there. Personally, what I think is interesting about the oil and gas industry, when you ask someone in oil and gas about nuclear, you get two answers. One is, yeah, it's obviously the future. We understand energy density. Or the second answer is like, hey, don't tell anyone that because it can replace oil and gas, right? And so people understand that, when it comes to energy density, nuclear is extremely attractive. Now, the negative to it is it takes 15 to 20 years to build a traditional plant. It's very cost prohibitive, and so there's a lot of argument against that. Now, the future with these small modular reactors is very interesting to me, and I think is the future. I think the future is nuclear. If we discovered nuclear today, we'd be like, oh, hey, we just solved all of our problems, both from an energy perspective and a decarbonization perspective. And so we also kind of got into a conversation over here talking about the future of nuclear fusion and another polarizing topic. But you have some, MIT's making some pretty great strides towards nuclear fusion. I just saw a company get funded like $500 million the other day that has a reactor that can fit inside the garage, apparently. So for me, I'm bullish on nuclear. I think nuclear has a ton of political baggage though, so it's hard to imagine it ever taking a considerable piece of the market share when it comes to baseload, unfortunately. So, I think people's minds are being changed a lot over the last 6 to 8 months with what's happening with geopolitics. And you have like California wanting to shut down Diablo Canyon and then reversing that and saying, oh, actually, no, we want that power. So I think when you hit a true energy crisis, people change their minds a little bit about where we get our energy. So I'm at least hopeful that nuclear will push through. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Got any more? Y'all are quiet. All right. Well,
We're actually your musical talent too, guys.
Yeah, so
so
I know y'all
with
were
that,
all
we'll get into
looking
the first
forward
song.
to this musical act, but yeah, they had to settle with us. So, quick plug before we get off the stage. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do this, but I'm going to do this. Next week, we have a big event called Fuse down in Houston, Texas. It's the South by Southwest of energy. So we shut down 4 city blocks in downtown Houston. It's at bars and breweries. It's outdoor festival style, and we're bringing together everyone from oil and gas, renewables, geothermal, hydrogen, electric vehicles. Someone said we might even have Elon Musk speaking. It's not confirmed yet, but we're working on that. So it's going to be a good time. If you guys want to go, let us know. We'll hook you guys up with a discount on tickets. It'll be a good time. And yeah, appreciate y'all having us here. This has been amazing.
Thank you, guys.
There you go. All right. Thank you, Colin and Jake, the Digital Wildcatters. Give them another hand.